Hello there, and welcome to this video highlighting one of the new features or enhancements to the Cisco Secure Firewall. This is one in a series of videos created to discuss and demonstrate the latest updates within the 6.7 release of software. In this video, I'll talk about and show you a workflow enhancement we've introduced, in particular enhancements to the Selective Deployment feature. We now have improved workflow separation between network and security operations teams. Prior to this release, if an access control policy is out of date, all other policies within the access control group need to be deployed, regardless of whether or not changes have been made to the other policies. We can now selectively deploy intrusion and/or file policies without deploying an access control policy, even if the access control policy is out of date. In addition to simplifying workflow and streamlining policy deployments, this change allows teams to separate the NetOps and SecOps duties to fit the operational or regulatory needs of the organization. Once an access control policy has been created, and intrusion or file policies have been added to one or more access rules, any subsequent changes to the intrusion or file policies, made by SecOps teams for example, do not require the access control policy to be deployed, or any other policies within the access control group, such as identity or SSL policies. Also, a NetOps user can add, remove, and edit access control rules and deploy them without having to deploy intrusion or file policies. To accomplish this, the system tracks the changes that are being made and performs an analysis at the time of deployment to determine if selective deployment can be used. Of course, there will still be scenarios where a full deployment is required. For example, removing an intrusion policy from an access control rule. The system will notify you when a full deployment is required. Now let's take a look at a demo. Let's start by logging into our Firepower Management Center. Here we can see we're logged on as a NetOps user, and that we have a rule in our access control policy. If we take a look at this, it's an outbound web rule from zone to zone, and if we look on the inspection tab, we can see here that we have two SecOps policies defined. So we have an intrusion policy and a malware policy. So let's close out of there, and if we now move over to our SecOps user, so we can see here we've got another instance of the management interface. We've got the SecOps user logged in. And let's modify one of the policies. So if we take a look, we've got only access to intrusion and malware. So let's take a look at those. So we'll edit the current intrusion policy, which is the SecOps intrusion policy. You can see that's deployed to the device and it's up to date. If we just modify a rule in here, I'm just going to make a simple change. Let's just change the state of one of these rules. And we'll just set it to disabled. So let's push these changes back in. So let's go back and save this policy. We'll commit the changes. And we can now see that that SecOps intrusion policy is out of date for one of the devices that it's deployed to. While we're here, let's make a change to the malware and file policy as well. So here we have our SecOps malware policy. We'll edit that. And we'll just modify the rule, one of the rules that we have in here. So again, let's just make a small change. We'll ask it to store malware files, and we'll save those changes. Now if we look at the deployment page, so let's go to deployment, and we can see that our device has pending changes. And if we look here, we can see that we're showing two policies under the access control group. So you'll notice though that there's no access control policy in there. And if we enable the policy selection, you can see that we can either select one of the policies for deployment, we can select both of them, or either of them can be deployed down to the firewall individually. But you'll notice again that there's no access control policy in there. So let's go back to our NetOps user and let's make a change to our rule that actually uses those two policies. So I'm just going to make a quick logging change. So let's tell it to log at the end of the connection. We'll save that change, and then we will save the policy, and we'll go to the deploy page on here as well. So let's take a look at the deployment page for the NetOps user. So again, we can see the firewall has pending changes. And now we can see that we have the access control policy included in there. Now we haven't pushed the file or intrusion policy down yet. So from a NetOps point of view, we can choose to select all of them, or we can just choose the access control policy. In this case, we'll just choose the access control policy because we'll let the SecOps guys push the file and intrusion. So let's push that down. We'll wait for that policy to be deployed. Okay, we can see that's now completed and has been pushed down to the firewall device. So now we'll go back to our SecOps user. And in here now we can still see that we have our file and intrusion policy. So let's go ahead and start deploying some of these policies down to the device as well. So let's take the file policy. I could do them both simultaneously, but I'll just show you that we can select individual policies and push these down. So let's deploy the file policy first. We'll wait for that to complete. Okay, we can see that's completed now. So if we refresh this view, we should see that the only policy left for deployment is now the intrusion policy. And there we go, we can see that now. So we don't need to use the policy selection on here. We can just select the device that needs to be updated and we can initiate the deploy. And don't forget, you've also got the ability to see an estimate of how long the deploy is going to take as well before you deploy your changes down. So having this functionality now means that SecOps teams can modify intrusion and file policies, and they can deploy those changes without having to deploy the access control policy. So as you can see, all devices are now up to date. Now coming back to our NetOps user, we're going to add a rule this time, and this kind of illustrates that we can add rules to the policy. And obviously, assuming that we don't make any changes to the file or the inspection tab, then we can deploy this policy now without having to deploy the file and intrusion policies as well. So let's just add a quick block SSH rule. We'll add that, we'll save it. So we're not touching anything to do with the existing rule that uses the file and intrusion policy. And now when we deploy this, you can see that the only one available to us is the access control policy. So we can push that policy down and away we go. That concludes this demonstration. Thank you for taking the time to watch this update video. Don't forget, there is more content available covering the other new features in the 6.7 release, as well as new content covering topics associated with the Cisco Secure Firewall. As always, we recommend that you read the release notes for each new release, along with the configuration guides to get more information on the topics highlighted in these videos. Hope to see you again soon.